Culture. Can you hear me? Makanko Masfini Tananjarama. Just to introduce myself, I'm kind of new to OSA. So our next panel would be about health. Wi-Fi Yamayunat in Dubbanne. So will be titled Looking Back and Pressing Forward, Learning from the History of Public Health in Oromia in 1887 to, from 1887 to 1907. It's about, the health, public health issues back then in Oromia. To give a little background about Dr. Benya, he has a PhD in public health studies, and he published a lot of books, a lot of articles on public health issues, especially pertinent to Oromia. So I would like to invite Dr. Benya to this podium, and he will be giving us his article.
The question I'm asking and trying to answer is, what's really happened in 1887, between 1887 and 1897, which led to the mass days among the Oromo people? I'm trying to go back. I'm not a historian, but I'm trying to go back and see really what has happened. And so half or two-thirds of the Oromo people have been perished. Next slide, please. Even next. That's my roadmap. I don't want to go in detail. First, we need to understand, we have the background. According to data collected by Clay and Holcomb, 1875, Waliso and the surrounded area was being conquered by Abyssinia. 1881, Jimma and the Limmu. 1882, part of RC. 1886, Wallaga. 1886, also RC. And the red line, what I'm trying to show is 1887, in which the time when Harar and Elubabor was being captured, something has happened somewhere in Masawa area. So which means the random pest virus, which I'm referring to, in some part of Oromia, we call it Goloba, that led to mass deaths among Oromo cattle. In some part of Oromia, they call it Gowonsa. Okay, so it's a widely spread problem. Next, please. Next. Okay, next. Okay, so my second background is according to Bulatovich, a Russian writer, destruction of the Oromo population during subjugation of the region has half depopulated it. That's Bulatovich. Similarly, De Silviak reported that the bloody Abyssinian conquest that proceeded followed the calamity of population of Oromo people were 25 to 30 million people. After that was reduced to 10 million. Also, De Silviak reported that in some cases, European missionaries saved children from famine, resulted from famine. My grandmother, when I was a child, she told me about a time called Baranamanyata, which is very much similar to what the Silvac has been recorded. So what I'm trying to understand is what really has happened at that time that led to famine. Next, please. So the question I'm asking, research question, what were the social and biological causes that led to famine and subsequently a number of diseases? What was the role of Italian and Abyssinian colonial forces in introducing red pest virus? Red pest is what I'm referring to, a scientific name for the Oromos, what the Oromos call it, Golloba. Okay, and second question I'm asking is how did the Ethiopian and the Abyssinian leaders manage that epidemic in Oromia compared to in Abyssinia? Next question, please. And next again. So in public health, we know that colonialism is always linked to public health problem through several routes. The first route is deliberate introduction of infectious diseases. Second route is cross-border military movement and settlers movement spreads known or unknown infectious diseases. The third point is turning unfortunate tragedies and in some cases infectious diseases into as a military or a biological weapon. The fourth issue is neglecting diseases and famines. The five is disrupting the social conditions of the colonized people. Six is denying people developing leadership and preventing it. Historically, we know red pest virus, okay? Red pest virus is not indigenous to Africa. It was indigenous to Europe and Asia. It was only in 1887. In 1887, the Italian army stationed in Massawa, present state of Yemen, Eritrea, imported infected cattle from Arab, Yemen, different sources, some of them are saying from India. These infected cattle, at that time, the king of Abyssinia was happened to be King Johannes. King Johannes invaded that camp, took the cattle to northern highlands of Eritrea. As a result, the infection emerged in Eritrea first, and then Tigray, Gondar. This has resulted in famine in Abyssinia that the Abyssinian called it Kfu Zaman. Next, please. What we know about red pest virus is acute, contagious. It's, as the Oromo named it, Gowomsa, it's depressing, diarrhea, dehydration, and this rate is about 95% of the cattle will die if they are infected. Next, please. Okay, this is a case in Oromia, and interestingly, that infectious diseases went up to South Africa. This is the case in South Africa. In some part of Oromia, they also call it shokke. In Eastern Oromia, they call it shokke. In Central Oromia, they call it Gowomsa. In my area, we call it Golloba. Next, please. So historically, we know that they say that red pest virus is responsible for the collapse of Roman Empire. It's aided conquest of Genghis Khan, which is Tatars or Mongolians to invade Europe. It's also linked that it is responsible for French Revolution and Russian Revolution. And in some countries, like colonization of sub-Saharan Africa, were implicated also. Interestingly, when the same infectious diseases that was been introduced in Matsawa and went to Kenya, it led to destruction of the Maasai's cattle. As a result of that, interesting, when Maasai was suffering from the famine, resulting from this virus, the British and the German were observing it. So they thought that it's going to be weaken the Maasai so that they can invade Kenya, Tanzania, and so forth. Next, please. Magnitude of the problem is it's very contagious disease, the most deadly disease known. Cause 90 to 95% mortality in zebu cattle and buffalo, mild and with goats. Record shows King Menelik have lost about 250,000 of his cattle. Some rich Oromos lost about 10 to 12,000 thousands of cattle. Next, please. So, in fact, this record shows that it was 1887 that started in Horn of Africa. And now in 2011, now the infectious disease is totally eradicated. Next, please. What the Abyssinians say? Look what the Abyssinian record shows. Moza Qaranio, Mno Aitares, Damboj Dabrawork, Mno Aitares, Baresa Laimata Kazas Kazidres. This was what we have learned when I was a high school student. But the context of that information has never been disclosed. Clearly from this information, we can understand that the Abyssinians suffered from the famine. They lost their cattle and many people have died. Next, please. Interestingly, although they suffered from the infection, they are always blaming the Oromos. That's what they say. Arab Galla Hono, Sons Fajau, so they are blaming the Oromos for the cause. Next, please. Interestingly, what actions Menelik take is very interesting to me from public perspective. From his side, even he stopped eating meat, gave his own cattle to Abyssinians, fed Abyssinians who migrated to Finfinne, ordered everyone to fast and pray, and of course, again, they blamed the Oromos for God not to listen to them. Because they blamed that the Oromos are not Christians, and so God is not listening to them. So, which I will discuss later on. Menelik was sin. It was as a result of that. Do you remember when Abyssinian called him Emiye Menelik? In Abyssinian culture or in any culture, man is not referred as a mother. But in this case, they referred to him as a mother because he took food from the Oromos and fed them. Okay, that's why they call him Emiye Menelik. Next, please. Okay, the Abyssinian survival strategy. They suffered a lot, okay, like the Oromos. And so the survival strategies, they massively joined the army, Menelik's army. Do you remember the word Watadar? Watadar, Amharic word for military is coming two words. Wato adar, meaning going out making the living. So given that they suffered from the famine, they joined the army so that they can go out, get whatever they need. If you remember the record, they were not salaried. They had no salary. They have to make their living by taking from somebody else. Given that the Oromos are Waqifat at that time, they blamed them so that God not listening to them. So they imposed forceful religious conversion intensified during that time. As a result, Oromos were being forced to observe the Abyssinian religious holidays. Do you remember? 44 holidays in 30 days of the month. Next, please. Interestingly, here you see the Jazmaj Garmame, sounds an Oromo name. He controlled Ada Barga, and beyond. He gave quality and quantity of grain. The name Garmame sounds an Oromo, but he was taking from the Oromos and giving to the Abyssinians. Ras Darge, who is a cousin of Menelik, controlled Salale, and he gave most of the grain. Ras Makonnen controlled Harar and gave 500 of bulls and 500 of cattle. Interestingly, when they took the cattle from Harar and taking to Mans, they realized that it was infectious diseases. When they took it from Harar to Mans, they never thought of the consequences, given that it's contagious. It can be so they are contaminating the area, but they never considered that. But when they arrived Mans, they quarantined the cows. Okay, so when it comes to when they are traveling in the Oromia, they never considered that. Okay, Emperor Taitu, she gave about 300 of cattle, and Oromo men and women to work for people in Gondar, because they were starved for 2 days. Now they cannot farm. Meal, clothes, Oromo men and women were also sent to Shawa. At the same time, they facilitated the movement of Abyssinians to southward. Whenever they arrived, they were being told to depend fully to people who are recently colonized. Next, please. Well, what did the Oromo lose? I don't want to discuss in detail, but I remember from my childhood there is a called Jariloni. In Jariloni, what we used to sing is Sawani, Sawani, Sawani Sagatu, Gafni Wanchata, Qorin Sinita, Afon Belabasa, whatever. This is what they lost. Practically, the Oromos lost everything that they have. Next, please. Okay, as a result, what happened? Loss of cattle, famine, mass deaths, and in some cases, migration within the Oromos. One case, for example, from just from Guduru, I don't know if you know about, from Guduru, many people were being displaced and they moved to Gimbi areas. Okay, children were being sold, taken to slavery, and some cases, for example, do you remember this lady? She is a mother of one of the grandmother of African National Congress, one of the African National Congress. And she, the record shows, next please. Okay, this is Oromo children sold during this time. Do you remember? If you look into the BBC record, Oromo children sold for maize in 1888. That was a year after the introduction of the infections. Next, please. So severity of famine is more higher in Oromos. In Abyssinian case, the introduction of the infection is a slow process because just simple movement of the cattle. In Oromo case, what's happening is the Abyssinians, when they were settling in Oromo land, they were taking 1 or 2 of their cattle, so they were spreading the infection to all part of the Oromia. So it was the Oromos didn't have time even to observe really what's going on so that they can protect themselves. Next, please. Okay, and in addition to that, the Oromos, although when the Oromos are suffering also from the famine, Abyssinians were taking the cattle and grain and shipping to the Abyssinia. They also, thousands of Abyssinians were also settled in Oromia. As a result of that, Oromo people were fully incapacitated. The story I had from my grandmother is, Baranamanyata, everybody was weak, hungry, and nobody was there to bury the dead. As a result of that, when hyenas start eating the dead bodies because nobody's burying, so it start eating the alive ones. Next, please. Okay, so in addition to that, it is severe in Oromia because Oromos were more dependent on cattle than the Abyssinians. Oromo institutions such as Gadak, Allu were attacked and the leadership had been incapacitated, so they were not in a position to do much. Next. Well, in general, what I'm trying to underline here is, who is responsible? Yes, Italian introduction of it was Italians who brought that infectious disease. And so the virus, did they brought knowingly to infect the Oromos or the rest other? I don't have evidence for that. What I know is the Abyssinian culture of military culture, non-salaried culture, military, who went to the Italian camp. They took the cattle and took to their highlands. Okay. The other interesting factor is the Abyssinian view about the Oromos, racist mindset. Okay, aggravated the problem. Okay. Such other factor is Oromo institution has been incapacitated. The Oromo was more dependent on the cattle than the Abyssinians. Most of the Oromos were more pastoralists at that time. This implicated to food security of the Oromo people. This morning, as we talked about, as the presenter talked about land grabbing, they were referring to about food security. Okay, so food security is as critical as anything else. Next. So recommendation I'm suggesting to prevent such tragedy, Oromo people need to assert their collective and individual rights. The Oromo people need to establish an institution and a leadership that guarantees them food security, enhance their public health preparedness. Oromo people need to diversify their economy. Next. Okay, the question that needs further studies is what was the true motive of Italians in bringing the infected cattle to Massawa? As I mentioned before, they knew it. It was responsible for the collapse of Roman Empire. If they knew it, did they brought to infect the rest so that they can colonize? I don't know. What I also know is the British was sitting and observing when the Messiah was dying. Their intention of observing, they are observing because they will incapacitate the Messiah so that they can invade. Is that what the Italians have? I don't know. So that's what I have. Thank you.
Urjikoon sin jedha akka gadaa keenya qarri urjis shani si fudhe baduudha borroon dhiisani amakoon sin jedha qubni harka as shani marmara ba'uun koo barsiin argaafani subirraa jalqabe salaanillee shani kootu dikkitti kokkootiin si beekani kootu dikkitti ko anaan si beekani ol furaa dhufani mootiin gibees shani kootu dikkitti kokkootiin si beekani kootu dikkitti ko anaan si beekani Ura jiru kooti yaada nuura halkan waarii taa'e laala suura suurri gaafaan baasee naan dubbatu gubaa jaalala keenaan.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Dr. Abdisa, for that very generous introduction. I will be speaking about this disease, cholera in Ethiopia. It was a mysterious disease, as you know, maybe 150 years ago. It killed a sitting US president. A US president died of cholera in Chicago from eating a raw salad. You can see a US president, how many people could be around him to give him a water to drink, to rehydrate himself. It kills just because you get dehydrated. And the dehydration is so severe that you won't be able to drink. You don't have time. Or probably people think that by restricting intake, because you are vomiting and having diarrhea, they may probably prevent more loss. But anyways, in the US back then, thousands died, and the US president sometime later died from cholera. By then, they don't know what causes the disease, and in Russia, millions died from cholera. But now we know what causes cholera and how to treat it. And I will discuss how a crime of an international scale, to me, is happening in that very, that country where we are from. A country where we are so ashamed to call ourselves we are from there. I am among those who are So I'm proud to call, not to call myself an Ethiopian, but to tell people that I am from that country. There are a lot of things that makes me sick. So, this disease is not everywhere, as you could see. It's in Africa, it's in Asia. It used to be everywhere. It used to kill people here. It killed the US president. It kills millions in Russia. And now it's in Africa and it's in Asia. It used to be in India, Bangladesh, Indonesia. It was endemic there. But nowadays, you don't have an epidemic of massive scale killing thousands in India or in Bangladesh. But you have a disease in Africa, like 98.2% of cholera cases are nowadays in Africa. And I will tell you where that disease is and what measures has been taken by that brutal regime. So, you know, in London they had to determine, you know, John Snow, and there was certain epidemiologists who said that it was caused by a water source that was contaminated. That was a big discovery. That cholera is caused by, you know, drinking a contaminated water. And then another, like Robert Koch, found that it was actually cholera that, you know, the Vibrio cholerae, the organism that caused. Those are years later. But now we know it. Okay, thank you. So, how do you treat this disease? You just rehydrate. Because it kills. Not everybody who has cholera develops a severe dehydration. Some of them do. And the best way to treat it is to rehydrate. You have diarrhea, you vomit, it's just massive. You keep rehydrating yourself. And nowadays we give antibiotics because we know it's a bacteria. But that's just what we do. Rehydrate, save lives. Next slide, please. And there is a case definition. There is a case definition by WHO. So this case definition is taken as it is by the Ethiopian government, call it a regime or tags or whatever you want to call them, and they use this same definition and called it an acute watery diarrhea. That was the same term that was used by the Derg, so that they don't want to admit for political purposes that there is cholera. Derg used this term, acute watery diarrhea, and the PRDF or TPLF used it, but then they used it when even they labeled themselves as democratic regimes. And the most shameful thing I discovered was that they used this definition, WHO definition of cholera, as it is without changing a single word to define what they call an acute watery diarrhea that killed thousands. I will discuss. So this is one thing. I'm trying to build a case. My objective of this presentation is to indicate to you that officials in that country who deliberately hide an epidemic that caused deaths of thousands of people are criminally liable. And I will corroborate that with my findings. This is something that I already discussed. So they don't have a policy, a guideline how to prevent, let alone cholera, what they call an acute watery diarrhea. But now, 2011, 5 years after hundreds of thousands of people were affected and thousands died, they came with a guideline using again the same terminology to hide the fact that this disease existed there when it was confirmed by themselves and by others. Another slide. So in 2006, that's when I was in Oromia. I was the HIV/AIDS office head, and I used to work with the Ministry of Health, and I used to travel around Oromia very often. I used to go to Bale, to like Eastern RC, everywhere, and I have friends who are doctors who work in the Oromia Health Bureau, and I know that there is a cholera epidemic. I know that the World Health Organization, UN, OSA, all of these international organizations responded, and it was confirmed, but the regime was hiding it. Then we had 50,000 people who were affected, who had severe disease, or probably they were victims of this disease. They called it acute watery diarrhea. Now we know it was cholera. About 1.8% of them died. That was the days then. It was in 8 regions in the country. The regime initially kept quiet, wanted to hide it because it was in Oromia and it was not in Tigray. It was not even in the early stage in Amhara region. But they were so ignorant, they were so blind that this could engulf the whole country. And I will show you how it, it was in 146 districts in 9 zones in Oromia. And then in 2007, we had still 50,000 or so cases. You see, the mortality, the severity of the disease is going up because no adequate response was there to combat the epidemic. And then we had those diseases, and then 2008, and I was here, I used to follow the news, and we still continue to have cases. And by the way, the previous slide, you could see that more districts were now reporting diseases in all regions in the country. It was in Oromia, and we had 79% of the cases of cholera from that country in Oromia. Next slide. And this was a case from the West RC zone. Next slide, please. And then 2009, we had 31,000 cases, and the case fatality rate increased. Where is the response? Where is the Ministry of Health? Who are dying? Most of them were Oromos, that they don't want to care. And they were hiding the epidemic. I'm telling you before I ran out of time, they were hiding it because, it's not because the World Health Organization doesn't know that it is cholera. It's not because international organizations and Western countries don't know about it. They said some think that the regime is hiding this because this will disclosing this information may decrease tourism and export of agricultural produce. That's not the case. They were hiding it because they don't want this information to be used by the opposition against them. That there is a failed system there. Because you know that if the West want to take action and prevent their people to travel there, they have access to that information. They are not hiding away that information from the US or from the West. They are hiding it from their own people because they don't want the people to know. Those are the illiterate masses that you can rule over. Okay? So even in Zimbabwe, in a very brutal country they called authoritarian, they eventually reported that they had cholera cases. Actually, thousands died. In Ethiopia, Ethiopia was second to Zimbabwe. No Western country, no human rights organizations dare to say that a crime of international proportion, a human life lost, and the country not declaring that there is an epidemic going on, to me is a crime. And when Garuma was discussing about taking these people. My question in the beginning was, is criminal prosecution possible? I didn't discuss this with Garoma, but that was my objective. To one day to see all responsible for the deaths of Oromos and others in that country to be criminally liable, accountable. Because I would show you that the minister who signed on this document, who had a goal to eradicate cholera from Ethiopia in 2015, which is 2 years from now, signed on it without even mentioning the name of cholera. They want to eradicate it. And they want to continue to hide it. And I will tell you that it has been confirmed. And they even accepted in a meeting with the international organizations, WHO, UNICEF, that, or UNOCHA, and others, that this is cholera. And then they have laboratories and cholera treatment centers. They took samples, tested everywhere. They tested it in Bahardar. They tested it everywhere in Oromia. They know that it is cholera, but they hide it. Okay? Fast forward. So as you could see, this is the distribution of the disease in Africa. Ethiopia is second to Zimbabwe, but as you could see, because they are hiding cases and they are not reporting it as cholera, there is no, basically Ethiopia doesn't report to WHO that they have cholera, but they report what they call acute watery diarrhea. And WHO and all the international organizations accept it as acute watery diarrhea, and Ethiopia remains a country maybe without cholera. But there is reports, published reports, that I probably want to talk about. I researched it. There is a report from Beta Israel Deaconess Hospital in Boston, and there was a university lecturer who published this from Bahardar University, cases of, hundreds of cases of cholera. They tested what we call culture and sensitivity. They identified the organisms, which antibiotics are more effective than others. Remember, the purpose of declaring this as an outbreak of cholera is to save lives. International response to disease is more, it's more urgent when you declare it as an outbreak. They are compelled to, there is an international regulation, health regulation signed by Ethiopia. Ethiopia was violating that regulation, which was what was discussed by Garoma. If you sign a treaty or an international regulation which says that a country has to report or must report internationally notifiable diseases, and you don't do it, and you know it is cholera, it is a crime because thousands died. And by declaring it as an outbreak of cholera, what you do is you are giving the international responders, the chance to mobilize resources from donor countries and mount a very effective response. You provide antibiotics, you provide oral rehydration salts, and et cetera, et cetera. So I am just saying that we can't continue to let this happen. Every time there is cholera reported from Oromia, we should speak up. We should tell them that it is a crime. And a response proportional to the extent of the problem should be there. Or they are responsible for losses of human lives. Thank you.
Urjikoon sinjada akka gadaa keenya qarri urjis shani si futte baduudha forroon dhiisani amakoon sinjada Ama konsi jedha qubni harka as shanii marmaraa ba'uun koo barsiin argaafanii subirraa jalqabee salaannillee shanii kootu dikkitti kootiin si beekanii kootu dikkitti anaan si beekanii ol furaa dhufanii mootiin gibees shanii kootu dikkitti kootiin si beekanii kootu dikkitti anaan si beekanii
Okay, now
Not
what?
you. I'm sorry. It's not you. The lady. But you'll be next.
Thank you for the wonderful presentation. I will start my question with from the second presentation. So you have discussed about the World Health Organization and the international health regulation. My question is, if you remember, I don't know if it was in 2007, there was an influenza outbreak in China where the Chinese government denied that there is no, that there was no outbreak of influenza till the end, until there was a media influence that later on helped the World Health Organization to declare international health emergency. So my question is, well, in the regulation, of course, that it is not only states which are supposed to report, the media or third party is also allowed to report the existence of such diseases, infectious diseases or communicable diseases, or call it whatever, that they have the right to report and to bring the case to the WHO. So my question is, if we have, such data that shows there was a cholera outbreak in Ethiopia, what were the efforts made by third parties, excluding the state, of course, to make a report? And also, what should we do in such cases? Because we know that states, also that happened, I think, in Thailand, that states, there's a culture on the part of states to deny such, such outbreaks. So what do you suggest as a third party, as individuals, or as a health, other health professionals, that what should we do to make, to show the case to the World to the WHO?
Okay.
And I have one question.
Only one question.
Yeah,
one question.
sorry.
Sorry about that.
That should be for the first presenter.
Uh-huh.
My question is, what should we learn from that history? So, that happened. So what should we do? As you say, you suggested some points, but political change, political leadership might not happen easily. So as a society, as Oromos, what should they do to make a public health behavioral change or to any other sort of public health intervention? Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And then probably we can answer this question first, and Dr. Ibrahim will go from the first part, and then Dr. Benya will be following the next.
Yeah, remember countries which signed international like treaties or regulations, such as this international health regulation signed in 2000, I think 2005, there was the WHO, I think the assembly, they already had this regulation that should be signed by all member countries, and Ethiopia, I think, signed it in 2007. I think that was it, when it was finalized, and according to that regulation, they have to report a cholera. By now, cholera is endemic in Ethiopia. It's not even like a disease, because it has been ongoing for 5-6 years now. They didn't report it then, they didn't report it 5 years later. And it's still probably going on, and they just report to WHO as cases of acute watery diarrhea. And if you are strong, they will at least they will continue. They will report after the epidemic passed that those cases were cholera in retrospect. But even the government of Ethiopia is not willing to declare what was, what we know now that it was cases of cholera. But about China and other countries, I believe, I don't know whether they signed those like regulations, but what I know is in Ethiopia also they report diseases that are notifiable, so like new ones. The swine flu. The minister reported that those cases were detected in Ethiopia within days of confirming that the virus was in Addis Ababa. Like some students who were in US and they went back to Ethiopia and they were having fever, and he proudly said, we have now a case of swine flu. I mean those. So they are reporting yellow fever, but cholera kills thousands, and the reason they don't want to admit is because it shows that that the sanitary condition is low, or probably whatever they are claiming in terms of successes in the health sector is probably not there. And one thing that I didn't mention, and I want you guys to know, is that most of the cases are in central Oromia, where we have these horticulture, flower industries, where there are thousands of migrant workers around these farms where they have no latrine facilities. There is basically no, they give them lands, they have all these like big investments in Eastern Shawa or in West RC, like around Zoai, like if you guys know where, those places, even around those big things, they have no latrines. They don't provide thousands of their laborers, so they go and defecate on the open field. And that's what drives the epidemic. Now it's just going on for years and years and killing thousands.
Sorry to interrupt you, but the other question she is having, the government didn't report at that time, but why not the other parties, like the third parties?
Reuters and all the medias, even Reuters, they reported that they reported that there was a minute that was leaked. My sources are mainly from international medias, including the Oromo medias like Gada.com and the rest. You can find those reports, even from Moyele and you can find reports from, about cholera cases from Moyele, from Shashamane and RC, etc., etc. But the thing is, even the Reuters reported that a document was leaked, a minute, where there are all these international organizations in the presence of the officials of the Ministry of Health. They accepted that these are cases of cholera. They want them to help the government or the regime in responding to the epidemic, but they didn't want to confirm. But then that document was leaked to the media, and the media reported on it for days and weeks.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So I think the other issue that diarrhea is going, maybe if I step in, diarrhea is caused by a lot of problems, viral disease, other infectious problems. But in order to confirm it is cholera, then you have to do the testing and to be confirmed, and then there is a case definition by the Public Health, Ministry of Health, and then the government makes the decision whether or not to report it. So in order for the third party to get into this information, then it's kind of very hard. They have diarrhea, a lot of people are sick, but that doesn't mean that it's cholera. So cholera is a little more, it's very scary, so that's why they try not to report it. So I would like to give Dr. Benya another look at the question and actually the second part regarding the public health issues.
Thank you for the question. In fact, one of my objectives in presenting the paper is we are not learning from the past. The attitude of Ethiopian government or an Abyssinian government is never changed. That's why we need to push ourselves so that we can ask such questions. Historically, it is proven from one to the other. Those who are in power, they are not willing to address the need of others. I remember very often when, for example, Ethiopian Prime Minister Meles Zenawi was questioned about HIV/AIDS, he always complained or blamed the woman. In my view, he is victimizing the victims. Okay, for example, when the cholera case was being reported, there was an interview with a woman who has been just survived the cholera, and she was telling on the media that they blame her that she is not a hygienic person. They don't take responsibility to address the need of the people, but they continue blaming them. So what we need to underline at this point is others, are not willing to address the need of our people. We have to push ourselves, do whatever we can to report, to raise awareness, and write and research. Otherwise, we have seen it here in North America, Native Americans, Native Canadians practically wiped out. What happened to them? The colonizers are not willing to address their needs. This is our reality in Ethiopia. When Oromos are starving to death, okay, the Abyssinians were taking their properties, their cattle, their grains. In some cases, they simply burn the grain. What the intention is to control, to manipulate, to colonize. Okay? So, in fact, institutions who are willing to kill, as we have seen it, several cases, human rights reports, do you think they are really willing to help you to survive? I don't believe that's the case. What we need to do is we need to do our best to build our institutions here or there, and so that we can stand for ourselves. When we say stand for ourselves, it's not intended, to imply that we have to work against others. In fact, we can work for others too. But that's what I can say.
Thank you so much. I'm afraid we don't have any more time. Sorry. So I would like to thank the panel, Dr. Benya and Dr. Ibrahim, for their nice presentation. I would like to comment on the fact that our public health policies are, like you already know, that it is the health policy of the government influences, whatever decision they do. I've been in Oromia, I practiced medicine in Oromia, so it's a very difficult situation. The Oromia Health Bureau is not really a strong institution. Basically, the name Oromia Health Bureau, who is supposed to do all those things, but it's not functional institution. So probably we all have some input as to try to figure out what's going on, what to do about the healthcare situation in Oromia, and also including even in diaspora as well. I would like to invite healthcare professionals to join in our quest to come up with some health Oromia some organization. I would like to, you can contact me personally and give me your email so that we can set up something that investigate about all these things. Thanks again.
I thank the presenters. This health panel is very interesting. My suggestion to Dr. Benya, Dr. Masfin, and Dr. Ibrahim is we need to create an advocacy task force who can expose what you said is going on, especially an advocacy task force of health professionals. They have to expose. We need to fight in every sphere. Nobody is going to fight for us. So anything happening in the health of sphere, in everything, we need to speak out. I think Dr. Ibrahim has a very good opportunity now that I have I know what
Urjikon sinjada akka gadaa keenya qarri urjis shani si futte baduudha warroon dhiisani amakon sinjada namni harka as
We are
shanii
one more
marmara
panel
ba'uun
to go.
kofarsin argaafanii subirraa jalqabee salaanillee shanii kootu dikkitti kootiin si beekanii kootu dikkitti anaan si beekanii wal furaa dhufanii mootiin gibees shanii kootu dikkitti kootiin si beekanii kootu dikkitti anaan si beekanii oh 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 oh